Hi, it's Steven with Classic Typewriter. Welcome to the world of vintage letter pressing. I love writing on a manual typewriter, and that's why I started to share them with the world. During graduate school for fine art, I started writing on a typewriter. I was a graphic designer by day. I got burned out on screens. At night, I still wanted to write. I was like, I'm never writing because I'm done with a computer. I use it for work all day. It kind of got this negative association with the tool, not to mention the litany of distractions that would assail me whenever I would touch a computer. And that's gotten much worse by now. This was 2002. So I just started pounding away on a 1940s Smith Corona Silent. And at first it was like, oh, I don't know if I can do this. It's really awkward. Though it was immediately like a revelatory experience when I would see the letters come alive on the page. I don't know why, because I've seen printers working, and I've used. It's like children using a stamp. They're like, "Oh, that's a beautiful thing." Our daughter has a little set of stamps, and it's always like mystifying to her. Or a Polaroid, psh, a picture comes out. Wow! Just in the digital age, those things seem so surprising because now there's all these layers between the thought and the creation, and so just to have that immediate manifestation of what's in the mind onto the paper is a magical thing that's very difficult to articulate it. Kids definitely feel it. And I don't know, I even felt it, even though it's strange because I was easily able to write something out and print it right away. What's the difference? It's all these layers in between. As I think Annie Dillard once said, I write to discover what I think. And that's true. Like, I advocate for a page per day writing just to get into the state of flow. And it's awkward at first, and one needs to be in flow with the machine. So I always recommend getting to know a machine well. I love working on a machine that I've used for a couple of years. I mean, a model that I've used for a couple of years, because I'm like, oh yeah, this starts to feel familiar enough where I can test it out and see if it's in flow and see what I can do with it and what a writer could do with it, because I recommend machines based on how they work and flow. And a lot of the typewriter text, they're just machines moving through. They kind of like how they look. They're sort of interesting. And they don't, nobody has time to get in flow with every kind of machine. So it's helpful if one is also a writer, because the more you've been in flow with a machine, the more you can speak to the peculiarities and the idiosyncrasies of that particular model. And I couldn't do that for a few that I haven't used a lot, and I could for a Smith Corona Silent. I used an SM3 for a long time, a Latura 32. I've used a Groma Colibri a lot. And of course there's overlaps, like a lot of those Smith Coronas have a similar feeling and similar functionality, so I can speak on those. Similarly, an Olympia Ultra Portable SF or an SM or a SM9, I can speak on a lot of those because that has a similar flow. I had an SM9, that was my second typewriter. I had that for many years. So it helps that I've become familiar and intimate with a few models. And what I want to say for you is that I can't help but speak upon how beautiful it is to use a vintage typewriter in the digital age. This is my logo designed for me. I also do healing work, and the client traded some healing work. Though he was a well-known designer, he traded some healing work for a logo. And the healing work overflows into the typewriter world. Like, I've had clients, I've lended them a typewriter while they were working through their life story, and they started to hash it out, reframe it, and think about it, and write it out, and a few published them, so that's a beautiful thing. And I use, personally, there's a yogi I heard about in a Ken Wilber series who his only tool was writing for reaching spiritual awakening. He said, I don't meditate, I don't do this, I don't do yoga, I write. And that's just a very fascinating potential of the writing itself. Writing itself can kind of excavate your wounds, can find you liberation. So it's a way to just engage with the world. And that's how I love it. I love the writings of Henry Miller because they're this excavation process, and you watch him go through this process of evolution into his Big Sur writings, where he's like an awakened, if you listen to a biography about him, he's still miserable and suffering. He's having women problems and money problems. However, he guides himself and us through the prose to this awakening state, and that's the kind of literature I love. Some sort of redemption story, like you pay a price for your salvation or your freedom, and he was obsessed with religious figures and how they carried the stories like that. So writers like that, a lot of us have a nostalgic connection with certain writers, and that's how we get into typewriters, or we just have a fascination. If you see a writer pounding away, Henry Miller's not so old that you can't find footage of him typing or him just talking about his typewriter, because he wrote on a Underwood 5, a big old monster desktop, and they have it at Big Sur. It's all rusty, like it just sat out in his cabin after he passed for many years. But when I have two of those right now, when I see them, I just think, oh, wow. I love that. I love touching in the history of this person, this writer that I really enjoy and I look up to in some ways. And that's a beautiful thing. And all these threads start to flow together. And as you just explore the history, the writers you love, what do they use? Most 20th century writers that are ultra successful have used a typewriter, even up to J.K. Rowling and Thomas Pynchon and Cormac McCarthy and Danielle Steele and some others. Some just never got off of it, because if it works, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? If you're already using this writing tool and making beautiful works that are changing the world or enriching your wallet and soul, why would, when another tool come along, a computer, why would everyone leap over? Most people did, though, and that's the challenge, because we weren't entrenched enough in typewriters. My first writing machine was this old Brother word processor. It had this huge bottom. It could only hold a few pages, and I would type my essays for high school on that. So I'm kind of bridging in between worlds. In the 90s, there were some nice, I think they're called Alpha Smart Duo and Duo 2, little flat writing machines that are useful. You can still get them and refurbish them so that they have a rechargeable battery pack. And then Astro House makes a free write and a few other typewriters that are they're not typewriters, they're little digital word processors with a sort of a paperwhite screen. Those are all nice to avoid the distraction piece, and it's nice to have the pages in the cloud. And I use a Remarkable 2, which is a paper tablet, and it has a little Typefolio keyboard. So I do put feet in the digital realm, and I put feet in the analog realm, and there's nothing like writing on a typewriter. Just those other things are pale comparisons, though they're cool and I own them and I sometimes use them, and they're practical, they're pragmatic. But when you take up a comfort or inefficiency, you give up something else. So what are we giving up when we give up the writing tool that actually creates a tangible expression of our inner reality in the moment? And I think people will begin making something like vintage typewriters again. I've often sketched out designs for them myself after having looked through so many of the world's finest models. And I believe that will be forthcoming. And it would be nice if you could type and it was in the real and then it was somehow also maybe in a cloud, because that's how some of these work, like the Remarkable, it's in the cloud. The typewriter is powerful for drafting, so you just crank through and watch the lines move through and watch yourself manifest. They're also very, some are very portable, some are less so. If that's not a concern of yours, then don't worry too much about the portability piece. Like that Henry Miller Underwood number 5 is 40 pounds. It's this big. There's one on my desk. I had so many of these in my office, the walls started to crack. So don't have more than one. And they, they're so hardy and resilient that they can work with a little bit of maintenance and just a little bit of getting them together, rather than a lot of the more intricate, subtle machines like a Hermes Baby need a lot of tweaking and customization to work at all. And if one little thing gets bent, it won't move. It's just not a lot of clearance for that working. So write your heart out, write your soul out, find the tool that works for you. Give up distraction. I think a lot of people want me to just say the history of typewriters, from this year to this year, da 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 da, and that's okay. It's just, it's not all I love about typewriters. I don't really necessarily, I read a lot about the inventors of different models and the history and the years and the evolution. Moreover, what's more important is that I've worked through and seen on the machines the different um, evolution of different components, which I find fascinating, particularly in the design realm. Like I love to look at, if you look at like a Corona 4, it's riddled with screws on either side. And then if you work up to like a silent, you can barely see the screws, they're kind of hidden. Then you're up at a Hermes 3000, there are no screws, like everything's under, I mean, there are very few screws showing. They're under the covers and they're on the bottom and they're on the back. So I love the earlier typewriters because the mechanics are all just splayed out there, and then your writing and the words are also out there. So everything's like out in the open. You'll see like cranks turning. That Underwood number 5, there's a big crank on the side where you can turn to reverse the ribbon. Just the mechanics are visible. I have a Hammond folding, and that's the same way. You'll see gears moving as you're typing. And if you want to take panels off, you'll see that even more. That's just a fascinating, beautiful thing. And I think a contemporary typewriter would have more of, be enclosed, but also just have some of the beautiful mechanics moving and working like clockwork that's visible. So that's just my little rant on vintage typewriters. And again, I got into them to save them from the landfills, and people started wanting them, and I found that there were a lot available and only a few that were like worthy of bringing to working order. For some discerning buyers. And so it's fun to go around and hunt for those, and the special ones and the perfect ones and the beautiful ones that have not been totally abused. And some people just need a rough workhorse, and that's fine too. You know, sometimes that's the case. And some people want just this startling museum quality piece on their desk that they can also write on, and that's what I love. How can they survive 100 years and still be in such exquisite condition sometimes? It's like they come from a time capsule to your desk. Isn't that beautiful? Like, think of a MacBook Pro, how useless it is after a couple years. I mean, I had a unibody one for maybe 7 years, and after that, a bunch of crappier ones that like petered out after a couple of years. So this is a lifelong, forever instrument. And that's just part of the allure, part of the fascination too. Like, machines that last forever. It's kind of like old cars. If you ever watch like Poirot or one of those shows about the 20s and 30s, you'll see like these old Fords driving around. And how are they still complete and still work? Because now we have this landfill culture where there's like old Saturns in a landfill. They're like 20 years old. Then you have 100-year-old cars. I mean, it's just a different way of building. There wasn't obsolescence designed into the build. So that's fascinating for people too. So I started rescuing these machines from landfills, putting them in the hands of writers. Some people won't understand this. They don't have to. Like, I love my computer. My computer and my phone are my favorite thing. I mean, that's okay. And you may not be the writer you're destined to be yet, if that's the case. Because we've kind of been sidetracked and waylaid by this quick evolution of like technologies that pull us away from our core human essence. So let's take what's human back. Why do I say that about a machine? Because you could just write with a pen. And I'm not saying don't, like, write with a pen. I'm sure you still do. This over-reliance on digital, as Rudolf Steiner called it, aromonic. And it links with like anger and impatience and prone to illness and weak immunity and like a bunch of other stuff. This is the Aramon cluster that I call it. So let's get out of that. And same with AI now. It's like people just, I'm going to make some coffee. AI, can you make my coffee? Like, there's just an over-reliance on certain kinds of technology. It doesn't mean because it exists we have to use it for everything. And that's how we're kind of pushed. Like when you go to a restaurant, you open a menu, you start to order. And then there's the ones where you have to like scan the QR code, and it won't load, and you're waiting for, and you're not looking at the waitress because I'm trying to figure out this thing. And then you're you're sitting across from the person you're supposed to eat with, and you're looking at the phone because you're thinking of adding a dessert. And it's just this weird thing where like you go to eat to be human together in this bonding ritual, and what happens? You're just stuck there. So welcome to the new world. The new world is re-embracing the old world. Again, I think there could be an ideal vintage manual typewriter that actually manifests on the page as you write, not like those digital clocky keyboards that are toys that connect to like an iPad or whatever that look like a typewriter keyboard but do nothing of the sort. Although they still connect with a nostalgia piece, that's okay. I don't think typewriters reached the pinnacle of their evolutionary state, though they came close with like a Hermes 3000 and the machines from the 60s. I like a Smith Corona Silent Super, and even a Latura 32, though there are, like, I would work out a few design kinks in the next iteration, which in a lot of these models, they didn't get worked out. They started to mass produce and they went to more plastic pieces and they went down in quality. So there's like a high point in the 50s and 60s if you want the most refined model, providing the least inconveniences. I don't necessarily. I love a machine from the 20s and 30s. I like to torture myself. There it is. I love my Hammond folding multiplex from 1923, and in Underwood Portable from 1930, and a lot of others. Like, I like that era. There's something about the quality and attention to detail on every screw and every piece and every panel and every decal. That's gradually lost and never touched again. And every iteration takes out something. Like, you're not going to have a little hand painted stripe or a little decal like that. No, that takes too much time. So this efficiency thing infiltrated even that world, and that's the way it goes. And that's understandable from a business perspective. Like, we're manufacturing these, let's get them efficient. The early typewriters, they had to bring the little parts to a machine shop, and they didn't always work because they weren't always identical. So sometimes the machine would hang up at certain points. That's how the early typewriters were. And then when things got more and more precise and efficient, they stripped away some of those extraneous details, they called it. It's just beautiful to be able to go find them again. And they're often, like Remington and Smith, Corona and Smith and Wesson, a lot of the gun companies, they made typewriters, and factories made guns. In wartime, they had to kind of shift their resources, and as a marketing effort, we can sell guns and typewriters. Remington is one of the household names because the machine parts got more refined. And once you're making refined parts in this factory, or my grandpa worked at a similar factory, then you can do it in all these ways. So 20s and 30s, sweet spot for highest caliber, not the most practical machines. You go up to 50s and 60s, far more practical machines, and still the forever lasting machines. You go up into the 70s and 80s, more plastic, more mass produced. Like, there's a sliding cover on these Smith Corona Galaxy and Classic 12 and these Silent Super and these, or Super Sterling, these kinds of machines. It's like this nice slide out cover. It's okay. It's a little bit, unrefined. But then later, they're like, that's not necessary. So there's just this plunky cover that comes out, and there's rubber washers, and then plops out and plops back on. It's very, like, you're just giving up things, and then the carriage lever returns become plastic. Later, the whole body becomes plastic. If you look at the later Olivetti Laturas, they're just all plastic. They barely, they function. However, like, you're just missing things. And people were like, oh, plastic is so lovely. Look how light it is and how you can shape it to anything. And people do that now with 3D, printing 3D junk. So, again, there's that sweet spot. There's a few sweet spots, and you just need to find those that work for your writing quality, your writing style. If you're just going to plunk out a few lines of poetry or a list or a note to a friend, then that's it. Do that on a machine. You don't need to write whole manuscript pages. You don't have to be that fluid. You can just enjoy the inspiration of the machine, like a Corona 3 from 1914, or like, and just, some people just type like this, and you don't need a very fast machine to do that. How fast can you get, right? That's how I typed in high school. It annoys the crap out of me now because I feel like you're not really enjoying the benefits of a typewriter. However, you're getting some of the benefits. Then if you go to if you want to write all manuscripts, again, on a 40 Smith Corona, I've written more pages than on anything else, and I never had a hiccup or a hang up, except for when I get really fast and in this state, I start to kind of misspell things, and sometimes I'll hit two keys at once because I'm like, ooh, I'm in the other realm. This is cool. I'm not paying as much attention to the details. And it takes a while for your fingers to get like strong enough to type that out. People often write to me, my machine's skipping them, because like on a computer, you're like this. It's like pretty lazy, right? And typewriter, there's like an up and down stroke. It's almost more like playing a piano, so you have to get a little bit used to that, and then it won't skip, because once you're lifting, these fingers won't lift as much at first. They're very weak. These also awaken like the different parts of your brain that move your toes and fingers, so that probably activates more pieces of you to put into the writing. Another beautiful benefit. I could list benefits all day. So I'm Stephen Budden from Classic Typewriter. I founded Classic Typewriter to bring gorgeous writing machines into the hands of writers like you who are either burned out on digital or just craving for that nostalgia, or want to break from digital, or just want to write notes to loved ones and friends. One Olympic coach writes notes to his athletes on a typewriter. I know at least a few businessmen and consultants that write notes to their clients on a typewriter because it's badass. It's awesome. It stands out. In a digital world, like, you give someone a note, wow, what is this? I've never seen something like this. People that will notice that. So thank you so much. Happy to be here. Follow if you feel inspired. I'm in a few places online, though as few as possible because I dislike this place. Thank you again. I'll see you on the other side.